Welcome to the latest instalment of History Mysteries, where I talk about interesting and little-known facts covering historical happenings from ancient times through to modern history. Today's mystery is the fossil known as Piltdown Man, which was called the remains of the first Englishman when it was discovered in 1912. If this week you were to read that the bones of the first Englishman in history had been unearthed in Sussex along with his cricket bat, you would quickly dismiss it as just fake news or an Onion article. However, in 1912, such an announcement was made, and it took just over 40 years for it to be conclusively proven as a hoax. Charles Dawson, lawyer by profession, was also an enthusiastic amateur collector of antiquities. However, unlike many of his contemporaries who travelled to Egypt to search for fossils, he preferred to search much closer to home. In his case, this was Sussex, England, just south of London, between Brighton and Hastings. There, in a local gravel pit, Dawson claimed he had discovered the skull of the missing link between ape and man. Dawson then contacted paleontologist Arthur Smith Woodward, a curator at the Natural History Museum in London. He explained his find, and from June to September 1912, Dawson and Woodward excavated the gravel pit, finding additional fragments of the skull. They also recovered a partial jawbone, teeth, fossils of animals and some primitive tools, including a mammoth bone which had been carved flat on one side and rounded on the other, which looked rather like a cricket bat. The skull was given the scientific name Eoanthropus dawsoni, Dawson's doorman, and it was promoted as a missing link between apes and humans, the remains of a primitive man that would have lived in England around 500,000 years ago, but no such creature ever existed. So now let's look at what might have motivated Dawson to perpetrate such a hoax and create this fake skull. We must remember that all reflections on historical events need to be seen through the lens of that time, so we must acknowledge that nationalism and racism, as well as the scientific expectations, played a role in the easy acceptance of the fossil as genuine. Let's look at the non-scientific issues first. We are looking at a time just before the First World War. Europe was becoming polarised, and Britain was part of the Triple Entente. Germany was becoming surrounded by enemies, but was building power politically and militarily. Also, in 1907, Heidelberg Man, the oldest human-like fossil then known, had been found near Heidelberg, Germany. As part of this nationalism, some Englishmen could not bear that early man was German, so the discovery of earlier humanoid remains in England would eclipse Germany's discovery and bolster England's prominence. As well as the political situation, the scientific community had a void they needed to fill: the missing link. For many years, the scientific community had sought to understand how man had evolved from herbivore to omnivore, and the evolutionary transition from ancient ape to modern man. There were two elements that needed to be considered: changes to the skull size to accommodate a growing brain, and changes to the jaw and teeth as the diet changed. The collective thinking within English scientists was that the brain had grown first. But where were any remains to support this? Remains that showed a larger skull capacity with an ape-like jaw. The skull allegedly uncovered by Dawson and Woodward was similar in shape to that of a modern human, although it was only about 2/3 the size of an average skull. It had two human-like molar teeth, but other than that, the jawbone was indistinguishable from that of a modern chimpanzee. To all intents and purposes, this looked very much like the missing link, a version of a humanoid skull that had aspects of a larger cranium for the increasing brain size, and an ape-like jaw. That was the prevailing scientific hypothesis. At the time of its discovery, Piltdown Man filled the void that the scientific community had, and that the nationalistic audience was keen to accept, and this was why the hoax succeeded so well. If people want to believe something, and it supports their own narrative, then they are much more likely to accept it, even if there are some flaws. Now let's look at how the hoax was eventually uncovered and the wider impact it had on scientific research. As early as 1913, the year after Piltdown Man was discovered, an article in the journal Nature raised doubts and suggested that the specimen was actually made from parts of a human skull and a separate ape jaw. This would be echoed by several other American and European naturalists. Their conclusion was that persons unknown had tried to age the specimen by staining the bones and other artefacts with an iron solution and chromic acid. Later, microscopic examination also revealed file marks on the teeth, and it was deduced from this that someone had modified the teeth to a shape more suited to a human diet of coarse food, rather than a strict herbivorous diet that would be more suited to a pure ape. As the years went by, more and more flaws were found with the Piltdown discovery. First, in 1926, the rocks in the gravel pit where Piltdown was discovered were found to be much less ancient than believed, bringing the date of the fossils into doubt. Additionally, from 1930, more and more specimens of Australopithecus were found. These, together with further examples of Neanderthal remains, left Piltdown man completely isolated in the sequence of fossils. Scientists increasingly regarded Piltdown as an anomaly in the path of human evolution, compared to all the fossils being uncovered elsewhere. When Piltdown man was conclusively exposed as a forgery in 1953, it was shown that it had consisted of fossilised chimpanzee teeth shoved into the 500-year-old jaw of an orangutan and deliberately combined with the skull of a fully developed, though small-skulled, medieval human. Although the animal remains found with Piltdown man were genuine extinct animals, further investigations undertaken showed that they were very unlikely to even be British fossils. The Piltdown man fraud significantly altered early research on human evolution, as it diverted considerable scientific attention and resources from focusing completely on other discoveries. Piltdown man had confirmed scientists' prevailing assumption that the human brain expanded in size before the jaw adapted to new types of food. So other discoveries, such as Australopithecus fossils found in Africa, that accurately showed that the jaw developed before the skull, were ignored, purely because Piltdown man was accepted as clearly the missing link. This preoccupation with accepting Piltdown man as the missing link had diverted attention from other feasible alternatives, and we now accept that skeletons found in Africa, then known as Pithecanthropus, and now called Homo erectus, are the ancestor of modern humans at the time Piltdown was supposed to date from. Neither Dawson, who died in 1916, nor Woodward the curator, who died in 1944, lived to see Piltdown man confirmed as a forgery. Extensive investigations have pointed to Dawson as the author of the fraud, which was reinforced in a 2016 study. The analysis of the original Piltdown remains with modern scientific techniques showed that the method used to age the fossils was the same for all the artefacts Dawson had ever found, some dating back to around 1890. The samples were stained a reddish brown, the cracks were filled with gravel, and sealed with dentist putty. This common, consistent technique linked all the specimens to a single forger, surely the man who had found them, Charles Dawson. Dawson's motivation merely seems to have been to achieve scientific recognition with his peers, and by reverse engineering the discoveries to match what the scientific community wanted to find, he had a receptive audience. The final and perhaps greatest piece of evidence that points to Dawson being the sole forger is that after Dawson's death in 1916, there were no more finds ever found at the Piltdown dig, despite excavation continuing for a further 21 years. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more history mysteries. For details on upcoming videos and shorter history facts, follow me on Instagram or Twitter, links are in the description.